This is What's Your Opinion? I'm here with Richard Bickel, photographer. For how long, Richard?
Most of my life, actually. 30-some years of professional work.
And where are you from originally?
Originally Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh.
How did you end up in Apalachicola?
Well, I was shooting regularly for national travel magazines, among other people, and I had an assignment directed to go to the Florida Panhandle. And I think I was chosen for that assignment because at that time, this was 20-some years ago, this was almost third world, and that's where the magazines, media used to send me. So I came down here, did a cover story, wrote part of the story as well, interviewed people, and did some vignettes on the local people and the local lore, and then went back, got my clothes, and came back because I knew there was a lot of material to mine, being one of Florida's last working waterfronts with the wealth of a very fertile bay and oyster boats and shrimp boats clogging the wharfs, and so that was captivating to see this in the U.S. and particularly in coastal Florida, where most of the coast is paved over and cluttered with high rises.
Susan and I were next door at the coffee shop last year when we were in Apalachicola, and we saw the picture of the four boys, and all the boys do the muscle poses, and we fell in love with that. And we said, "Where did you get that picture?" Just walk down the street. Well, we came in, and the first thing that captivated us about your photography is how much emotion you capture.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, that's what you go for, I think, as a documentary photographer, to get under the skin of folks, to get a little bit into their soul, include information about their lives. You're basically doing environmental portrait, and if you're doing a shot of a fisherman, like I often do, it's good to have some water behind, and the well-learned cracked knuckles in the foreground that reveal a life of hard work. So, for your viewers who don't know, he's holding oyster tongs, and he was a lifelong oysterman on Apalachicola Bay. Not only was he an oysterman, but he was a scrapper. He fought in all the juke joints throughout Apalachicola Bay, beat the daylights out of everybody, went to Birmingham for a semi-pro bout, knocked his opponent off through the ropes onto the floor, almost out cold. But he was very thin, and that last punch, he broke the bones in his hand, and the doctor told him to never go back to the ring again. But we kind of became friends. I'd hang out with him, drink beer over in the East Point Wharf. He would spin stories about fighting, bar fighting, and this very exotic world he grew up in. At the time, East Point and Apalachicola, there was not even a bridge going in between the two. It was just a ferry, so it was almost like an island here. And you had a very rich culture, and he had this very rich old Florida Panhandle accent. It was thick as Tupelo honey. And I think regarding the portrait, he had this chiseled face, and I had him do the side profile. He looks like Mount Rushmore. And then, of course, also revealing his creased fingers and even his dirty nails, which I think was probably engine grease from fixing his Evinrude engines from the 1970s just to get out on the water for an afternoon. So yeah, that's one of my favorite people in portraits because I knew him and we became friends, and I really think this is the photograph reveals who James King was. There's all sorts of elements, fugitive elements that come together to make a portrait, and that does have a certain amount of soul. And sometimes you've known the subject for a long time, and other times you just met in passing. But in that brief moment of interaction for the first time with someone, you have to present that person with, make an image that would suggest that you understand who that person is.
Well, I think to capture that, you've also got to be that person who has that compassion for people. Because I don't think people just, it's one thing about just shooting pictures and another thing about, taking a picture.
Agreed. I think, a lot of, most documentary photographers are, they have certain sensibilities, they're able to read people. And it pretty much comes down to an intuition, I think. You can, I've had people come in here and beginning photographers and ask me, how I do it, and look at their portfolio, and sometimes, and you can just see they don't have that intuition, and they might come back a year later. I always say, come on back and show me what you have. You got to work a little bit harder, and they still don't get it. So just like I couldn't be a CPA, and God forbid if I had to do someone's tax returns. Likewise, you have CPAs out there trying to do documentary work with everyone having a smartphone and suddenly becoming a photographer and in their own mind a very competent shooter. So I do have that intuition, I think, and that's helped me quite a bit, and that's one of the few aptitudes I have. I come from a family of engineers, and I have absolutely none of that ability or genetic thread to solve the simplest of math equations, geometry, what have you, like my forebears could do. But then they couldn't make pictures. So I finally had to get comfortable with myself, knowing that most of my other pursuits not that there were that many, but before I found myself in photography were failures. So you have a bit of insecurity. So. And that insecurity is common among, I think, photographers, artists, and that also
and actors really big. I know actors. They're the most insecure people I've ever met.
Yeah. So that kind of drives you. I
creative.
think. Yeah, you just, for me, it's people come in and say, well, what's your best picture? And I'll respond that it's the one that I haven't made yet. Or what country? I've been to, working in 80-some countries. What's your favorite country? It's the one I haven't been to. It's a path I haven't taken. It's a hill I haven't mounted with my camera that I haven't explored.
It's an interesting philosophy. Pretty much the same way when people say they're open-minded. Open-mindedness to me is you're willing to change your position daily if you find some growth there. Go, well, I'd never change this.
Yeah.
Well, then you're not open-minded.
No, absolutely. And, I think I'm really at the top of my game, even though I'm not a young person, obviously, anymore. But I have learned quite a bit, and I'm...
What are the most important things you think you've learned?
Well, a lot of it is honing what skills you already have, and I've just in recent years, and I say the last 5 or 10 years, I've become more directorial. At one time, throughout a lot of my career, I was just flying the wall, and I felt I was cheating somehow if I didn't get involved with if I got involved with my subjects and directed them and so on. So. I started working with people a little bit more, and there's one shot I have of a falconer in Morocco. He's holding the bird, and I discovered him at a cafe he had a whole collection of birds in Marrakesh, and I popped in and I saw the birds, and I said, this is the opportunity to make a picture. 10 years ago, I probably would have just snapped the shot and with his birds in his lap or what have you, but in this case, I asked him to hold the falcon, and he has this gnarled hand, and the bird is like staring intently into the camera, and the camera lens is like 3 inches from the bird's beak, from the falcon's beak, and I made the picture, and that was one of my more successful pictures. So I'm getting a higher ratio, I think, when I get out on the road and get into the streets where I often spend 10, 12 hours a day just wandering far off streets and turning over stones.
I think part of it is when you start out, you have a little innate fear about approaching people, and so when you overcome that fear and then you find out they want to please you too. They're excited that you're interested in them.
Exactly. No, you have it right, and you have that understanding. I was very shy as a child. I came from a bad home, a broken home, where I was taught I was pretty much worthless, and so that translated to interacting or not interacting with people, and ultimately my subjects, and keeping a distance. But to a certain degree, the camera was armor, where my eyeball was right in that lens, and that was my armor. That was where my whole body went into the viewfinder. So, and I was encouraged when I went to art school years ago. It was just a night course, but I had an excellent instructor, and taking pictures of both rocks and people, and he told me, well, the rocks weren't so great, but your people shots are promising. So,
see that little bit of encouragement.
Yeah.
Took one little spark, didn't it, for you to go, maybe I can do this?
Yeah, it did, and it was very encouraging because, as I mentioned, I was kind of a failure. Well, in school, I made it into college only because my family gave a grant to a certain school, and I got in, and mediocre grades in college, horrible grades in high school. And so I was just thrilled to find that I could do something right, that had approval of others, which I'm sure, there's no question I was seeking.
Yeah, I think we all do it in certain ways. Now, you started in photography. You shot for National Geographic. Just give us a little background there, because I was just pretty amazed once I started talking to you how far you did come in this field, which has got hundreds of thousands of people that.
Yeah, it's very competitive. It's probably more so now. It's always been competitive, and I just started schlocking my portfolio up to New York after I got out of art school, and this is back in the 80s, and often had the door closed in my face, so to speak, not quite that rudely or dramatically, but lots of failures, of course, and you would go into, and I wanted to shoot for travel magazine, for the travel media. So I got my foot in the door when a high school friend of mine, also living in Pittsburgh where I was at that time, was just broken into national working mostly for Travel Leisure magazine. And I joined him on a shoot in New York. He was shooting the Rainbow Room, big production shot, cover story. And I was able to meet the art director, and I asked our photo editor, and I was hanging out with her while he was setting all the lighting up and so on. I said, would you mind looking at my work if I brought it to New York? She said, oh, absolutely. So there I went from just putting my portfolio onto the receptionist's desk and then coming back that evening with a note saying, sorry, but we really don't need you right now, to having a connection, and then being able to, I went back a few other times after she looked at my first portfolio, and I learned a lot right away about my weaknesses and strengths. These art directors or photo editors, they go boom, 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 they look at your work just like snap of the fingers. They can look at, 30 images, 40 images in just a minute or two, and that's how their eyes work, and that's, I guess, kind of the way my eyes work, and or any photographer as well. And I kind of wormed my way into a certain degree, and then this high school friend, a few months later, had a job with Travel and Leisure. They're publishing a book, and he was going to Italy. And so I was able to find out through my connection at Travel Leisure what the, if they had any other openings to shoot. And they hadn't yet covered France. There was a story on.
Sounds like a good place to go, doesn't it?
Yeah, it was a story about Brittany, and so I told them that I was going to France, which I lied, and they said, well, you can do it on spec. So I lived in this Fiat for like 10 days, cluttered with fast food wrappers and drink cups, and shot this story in Brittany. And to my former friend's anger, I got the first chapter in the book, and he was actually the second. It was really strange, two high school buddies, you know, and suddenly I was estranged, you know, and he wasn't happy with that at all. And so there I started going on from doing a certain amount of work for Travel Leisure, Islands Magazine. I did a little work for Geographic Books, and picking up work regularly for Travel Holiday Magazine, who ultimately sent me here.
Now you have a website for people interested in your photography.
Yeah.
What is that?
It's Richard Bickel. It's B like boy, Bickel, richardbickelphotography.com.
And do you send quite a few pictures out, or here in Apalachicola, do you sell most of it?
Are you talking about published or otherwise, or?
Individual.
Yeah. I had to have different people to collect. But the gallery's been fairly successful. We're coming along. The tourism is increasing here and interest in this area.
That's great.
This photograph was made in Mali, West Africa, about 10, 12 years ago. It's probably one of my better portraits, if you will. It's called The Cement Man, and he was unloading a massive dugout on the banks of the Niger River.
A what? Oh, he was unloading what?
A massive dugout.
Dugout?
Dugout. A boat, a dugout canoe.
Oh, okay, gotcha. I did
And-
not know what it was.
Yeah, and so the powder from the cement sacks dusted his flesh and got into his eyes, which kind of gave him an eerie look. And in fact, there were about 10 laborers. They're all Tuaregs, which is a Saharan tribes person. They're getting urbanized now, but they used to be the fierce warrior tribe of the Sahara, taking salt caravans across the vast expanses of the Sahara. And this is the way they dress. This style of head wrap is very Tuareg. So this fellow, for some reason, captivated me, even though I could only see his eyes, just like his fellow laborers. And I asked the straw boss in a little bit of French I know if I could make some pictures, and he said, yeah, go ahead. So when I raised the camera, he went to drop his scarf, and that's when I shot just one frame before he took his scarf down.
Great.
And surprisingly, I mean, he looks a little, almost threatening in this photo, or at least disquieting. And once the scarf was dropped, he was the most innocent-looking soul that you can imagine. Youthful, probably late teens.
And looks intimidating there.
It does, yeah. And the photograph has an edge to it, and people interpret it different ways. And I've had folks come in and say, "Oh my God, is he a terrorist?" Which is kind of unfortunate. We have these misconceptions, but he was just a sweet guy. And then when I gave him the $2 modeling fee, all the other laborers gathered around me and demanded to be photographed as well. But I kind of scurried off. I had my picture. I knew I had my picture, and I moved on down the riverbank.
Oh, that's great. Now, explain that. I know obviously it's a baptism.
Yeah.
I love this one.
It's local. We're here in Apalachicola, Florida, on the Apalachicola River, and I've been prowling the watershed up and down the river clear to the Georgia border since I arrived 20 years ago. And I was working on a second book on Apalachicola called Apalachicola River, an American Treasure. I'm working with a filmmaker and doing stills for him as well on this joint project. And we were winding the project up, and we said, wouldn't it be great if we found a baptism, a local baptism to photograph? And doggone it, he found one up in Bluntstown, a church called the Prayer Changers Mission of God. And we met the parishioners on Camel Lake, up deep in the swamps, deep in the old Florida swamps. And the pastor, Pastor Geraldine, was very welcoming. I said, do you mind if we get in really close? She said, no. She said, once we get going, we won't know you're there. And in fact, they were speaking in tongues. But the videographer I was with, the guy making the film, we were kind of trying to figure out where we were going to stand. And only by luck, at least my luck, his camera broke down. So I had total freedom in terms of how I was moving. And that's really important when you're doing a group of like 6 people. You have to really be intense. You have to be inside that viewfinder. You have to look and anticipate every move of every person. sometimes you get it, sometimes you don't. And must have been divine intervention, because everybody in this frame belongs sharp as a tack, even though the light was really low. So like I said, this is one of the lucky ones.
Now, I've noticed your art, and you use mostly natural light.
Every image in here was shot with, natural
I just
light.
think it creates so much more realism. Sometimes you get a shadow, and oh, we got to take off. Well, that's real life.
Yeah. Well, it's easy enough to do, and even more so now that I shoot quite a bit digitally. Although this was made on 100 speed film. That's why I was saying technically, it was blind luck that I got everyone sharp on 100 speed film with fairly low light.
Yes.
But digitally now you can really just, you have even more freedom in terms of not having to have light with you.
Now you've changed, because a year ago we talked about digitally, and you said, well, I'm kind of playing with it, so you found it really works for you now.
Well, yeah, and especially, you get into third world locales and dim lighting, and even at night, like in Marrakesh, I like to wander the souks. And the people are very elusive there. In fact, they get quite angry as soon as they see your camera being raised. So at night, you get, you don't get a hassle. But more important than that, it's kind of eerie when you get into the, the old Arabic souks, and it can get very gritty and atmospheric.
Oh, that's so interesting. Richard, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed it. Good to see you again.
Thanks for your interest.